Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the endless ribbon of dust that stretched across the American frontier, where thousands of hopeful families slowly pushed westward in covered wagons toward a future they could barely imagine. Before you settle in, you might want to grab a blanket, dim the lights, and let the sound of distant wagon wheels replace the noise of the modern world. And if you somehow enjoy spending your evenings listening to stories about sore feet, spoiled bacon, broken wagon wheels, and endless prairie grass, you're in exactly the right place. Tonight, you are not a famous explorer. You are not a fearless gunslinger or a wealthy landowner. Instead, you are an ordinary father, mother, daughter, son, or grandparent traveling one of the longest overland migrations in American history. Your days will be measured by sunrise and sunset. Every meal will depend upon what still remains inside the wagon. Every creak may become either a blessing or a disaster. Every mile forward will cost energy that never fully returns. So before you close your eyes, take a slow breath and let us begin. The morning arrives quietly across the Missouri River frontier during the spring of 1847. Dawn slips across the prairie like pale gold poured over an endless sea of grass. A cool breeze brushes against the canvas cover of your wagon, carrying the smell of damp earth, horses, smoke, and fresh-cut timber from dozens of nearby camps. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, although there are very few proper farms left behind this far west. Your family has spent months preparing for this journey. The decision was never simple. Newspapers promised rich farmland in Oregon. Letters from earlier settlers described fertile valleys where crops seemed to grow almost effortlessly. Stories spread through towns across the eastern United States that Oregon offered fresh opportunities unavailable in crowded communities farther east. Some of those stories were true. Many were only partly true. Very few people talked honestly about the journey itself. You wake before sunrise because almost everyone does. Sleeping late simply wastes valuable daylight. Every hour matters when nearly 2,000 miles remain between Missouri and the fertile Willamette Valley. Your bed is not truly a bed. It is little more than blankets spread beneath the wagon or inside a crowded tent. During the night, your shoulders have stiffened against uneven ground. Tiny stones have somehow found their way beneath every blanket. Your back protests as soon as you stand. Nearby, someone is already blowing gently on yesterday's campfire, coaxing glowing embers back into life. Thin streams of gray smoke drift upward into the cold morning air. Breakfast rarely changes. Salt pork, cornmeal, hard biscuits, sometimes coffee, sometimes no coffee at all. Fresh eggs become increasingly rare after only a few weeks. Butter melts quickly during warm weather unless carefully protected. Fresh milk disappears once dairy animals become too exhausted or are traded away. Fruit is precious. Fresh vegetables vanish almost immediately after departure. Every bite must be carefully considered. Nothing can be wasted. The wagon itself appears larger than it really is. Popular imagination often pictures enormous homes on wheels, but most Oregon trail wagons are surprisingly modest. The famous prairie schooner measures only a few feet across inside. Once food barrels, tools, clothing, spare wagon parts, cooking equipment, rifles, bedding, and family possessions have been packed inside. There is remarkably little room left for people, contrary to many modern illustrations. Most travelers do not spend the day riding comfortably inside the wagon. Walking is often easier. Oxen move slowly, usually little faster than an average person can walk. Riding inside the wagon only adds unnecessary weight for the animals to pull. Children sometimes climb aboard when exhausted, but adults spend countless hours walking beside the wheels. By sunrise, camp has transformed into organized movement. Oxen are harnessed, ropes tightened, barrels secured, loose blankets folded, cooking pots cleaned, fire ashes scattered. The trail comes alive. Hundreds of wagons begin rolling westward, one after another, like a slow-moving river, made of canvas and timber. The sound never truly disappears. Wood creaks, iron rims grind against dry earth, leather straps stretch under tension, animals snort softly, children chatter, mothers call names, teamsters shout commands to their oxen. The entire migration moves with patient determination rather than excitement. Within only a few hours, dust begins coating everything. Your boots disappear beneath pale brown powder. Your trousers collect another layer. The wagon wheels throw clouds into the air with every rotation. Before lunchtime, your face already feels gritty. When you wipe sweat from your forehead, your hand comes away coated with fine dust. It settles inside food, inside blankets, inside rifles, inside flour barrels, inside lungs. No one escapes it. The trail itself is rarely smooth. Deep wagon ruts left by earlier travelers form uneven grooves that force constant attention. Sometimes, an entire wheel drops suddenly into an old rut, sending the wagon lurching sideways. Boxes shift. Metal tools clatter together. Glass bottles occasionally shatter despite careful packing. Every unexpected jolt reminds everyone how fragile many possessions truly are. Shoes wear down much faster than expected. Leather soles scrape mile after mile across rough ground. Many emigrants begin the journey with several pairs because experienced travelers understand that worn-out footwear can become a serious problem long before reaching Oregon. Children complain first. Their feet ache. Their legs tire. Some cry quietly. Others simply stop speaking. Parents encourage them onward because stopping solves nothing. Everyone keeps moving. Around midday, the wagon train pauses near a small stream. Shade is limited. cottonwood trees provide welcome relief for only a handful of families, while most sit beneath open sky. Lunch is modest: cold bacon, dry bread, perhaps beans left over from breakfast. Water must be collected carefully. Clear streams are welcomed, yet everyone understands that upstream travelers may already have used the same water for washing clothes, bathing animals, or cleaning cookware. Few people fully understand microscopic disease. Many illnesses travel silently. The afternoon sun grows steadily warmer. Wide grasslands seem endless. Hour after hour, the landscape barely changes. Prairie grasses sway like gentle waves beneath the wind. Wildflowers occasionally color the fields with purple, yellow, or white blossoms. Birds circle overhead. Antelope sometimes appear far away before vanishing over distant hills. The scenery possesses remarkable beauty. It also creates an overwhelming sense of endless distance. The horizon never appears closer. As evening approaches, people instinctively begin watching for suitable campsites. Water comes first. Grass for livestock comes second. Firewood, if available, becomes a luxury. Not every campsite offers all three. Sometimes dried buffalo dung replaces wood for cooking fires. New travelers often wrinkle their noses at the idea. Experienced emigrants simply gather it without complaint. On the open plains, fuel is fuel. After perhaps 15 miles of travel, the wagons finally stop. The day's journey has ended. The work has not. Animals must be watered, harnesses removed, meals prepared, children washed as best as possible, clothing repaired, wheels inspected, axles greased, tomorrow's supplies checked. Only after every chore has been completed does anyone truly rest. The campfire becomes the center of family life. Simple conversations drift through the cooling evening air. Someone quietly hums a hymn remembered from home. Another family reads a few verses from a well-worn Bible. Children laugh while chasing one another between wagons, until parents gently call them back before darkness settles completely. Above them stretches a night sky, unlike anything most eastern settlers have ever seen. Without cities, smoke, or electric lights, the heavens appear impossibly crowded with stars. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon like a pale river flowing overhead. For a brief moment, exhaustion gives way to wonder. The journey still feels possible. Hope remains stronger than fear. No one yet realizes how quickly optimism can be tested. The prairie is only the beginning. Ahead lie swollen rivers with no bridges, deserts where water nearly disappears, mountains that challenge every wheel and every weary animal, sudden storms capable of overturning wagons, sickness that arrives without warning, and choices that must sometimes be made with heartbreaking speed. Tonight, however, none of those dangers have fully revealed themselves. The camp gradually falls silent. One fire after another fades into glowing embers. Oxen settle into the grass. The prairie wind whispers softly through the canvas covers. You pull your blanket a little tighter against the cool night air, unaware that tomorrow will ask more from every member of your family than today ever did. The first pale hint of dawn arrives long before anyone feels rested. The prairie has a habit of making people believe they slept well simply because the night air is cool and the stars are beautiful. In reality, your hips are sore from the hard ground, your shoulders ache from yesterday's walking, and somewhere beneath your blanket, there is almost certainly another pebble pressing into your back. A distant ox lets out a low, rumbling call, followed by another. Within minutes, the camp begins stirring without anyone needing to announce that the day has started. The routine is already becoming familiar. Fires are coaxed back to life from glowing embers buried beneath gray ash. Someone chops the last few pieces of firewood collected the evening before. Iron kettles are balanced over the flames, while coffee, if there is enough left to brew, slowly begins to simmer. The smell is comforting, though weaker than it was during the first days of the journey. Many families deliberately use fewer coffee grounds now, hopping to make their precious supply last another week or two. Breakfast is quiet. Few people waste energy on unnecessary conversation before the day's march. Children rub sleep from their eyes, while mothers distribute biscuits that have become noticeably harder since leaving Missouri. A father carefully slices another portion of salt pork, trimming away pieces that have begun to spoil in the warming weather. Every edible scrap is saved. Even grease dripping into the pan may later be used to cook another meal. One of the first lessons learned on the Oregon Trail is that food has a different value than it does back home. At home, a poorly baked loaf of bread might be thrown away. Here, even stale crumbs are worth collecting. Flour that accidentally spills into the dirt represents not only wasted food, but wasted miles, because every pound lost cannot simply be replaced by visiting the nearest shop. Packing the wagon has become faster than it was during the first mornings. Blankets are folded tightly. Cooking utensils disappear into wooden boxes. Barrels are checked once again to ensure their lids remain secure. The wagon itself seems almost alive, creaking and shifting as though protesting another day of movement. Every wooden joint expands and contracts with changing temperatures, and every mile places fresh strain upon the entire structure. The oxen receive careful attention before anyone thinks about their own comfort. Unlike horses, which can move faster but tire more easily, oxen possess remarkable endurance. They are slower, stubborn, and not especially graceful. Yet, they are dependable workers capable of pulling heavy loads day after day. Many experienced emigrants trust them more than horses, despite their frustrating habit of stopping to nibble grass whenever given the slightest opportunity. Harnessing them is not glamorous work. Leather straps must be fitted correctly. Wooden yokes are lifted into place. Chains are examined for weak links. If even one piece fails many miles from the nearest settlement, repairing the wagon becomes considerably more difficult. As the wagon train begins rolling once again, the cool morning air offers a brief moment of relief before the sun climbs higher. You settle into the familiar rhythm of walking. Left foot, right foot, wheel turning beside you. The squeak of the axle becomes almost hypnotic, repeating every few seconds with remarkable consistency. At first, the prairie feels open and welcoming. Gentle hills rise and fall beneath an endless blue sky. Wild grasses ripple in every direction, stirred by a steady breeze that carries the scent of earth and growing plants. Meadowlarks sing from fence posts left behind by earlier travelers. Occasionally, a rabbit darts through the grass before disappearing completely. Hours pass. Distance on the Oregon Trail behaves strangely. Looking ahead, the road seems short. Looking behind, yesterday already feels impossibly far away. Yet by midday your legs remind you exactly how many miles have been covered. Blisters begin appearing on feet that had seemed perfectly healthy only days earlier. Thick leather boots help, but they cannot eliminate constant friction. Some travelers stop briefly to adjust socks or wrap sore spots with strips of cloth. Others simply continue walking because falling behind the wagon train is a greater concern than temporary discomfort. Children experience the trail differently. The youngest sometimes find excitement in collecting unusual stones or spotting birds they have never seen before. They chase grasshoppers while the wagons pause, laugh whenever prairie dogs disappear into their burrows, and invent games using sticks and feathers found along the roadside. Older children are often given serious responsibilities. A teenage boy may spend the day driving a team of oxen. A daughter might help prepare meals, gather water, watch younger siblings, or mend torn clothing during short breaks. Childhood on the trail leaves little room for idleness. Nearly everyone contributes in some way. Near midday, an unexpected shout echoes from farther ahead. The wagons begin slowing, then stopping. Word travels backward far more slowly than the wagons themselves. A broken wheel. No one seems surprised. Mechanical problems are almost expected. Families leave their wagons and gather at a respectful distance, while several men inspect the damage. The heavy wooden wheel has struck a hidden rock buried beneath the trail, splitting one section of its rim. The wagon cannot continue safely without repairs. Fortunately, spare materials have been carried for precisely this reason. Axes appear, wooden wedges, iron tools, a replacement spoke. Repairing a wagon beside the trail is exhausting work under the growing afternoon sun. Sweat darkens shirts almost immediately. Sawdust mixes with dust, already clinging to every sleeve and trouser leg. Meanwhile, the rest of the wagon train waits patiently. Waiting becomes another hidden challenge of the journey. No one enjoys losing valuable daylight, yet abandoning another family is considered deeply irresponsible unless circumstances become truly desperate. Cooperation often determines whether entire wagon companies succeed or fail. While repairs continue, children wander only a short distance from camp under watchful eyes. The prairie may appear peaceful, but parents remain cautious. A child can disappear surprisingly quickly among tall grasses. Snakes occasionally hide beneath rocks or fallen branches. Even something as simple as twisting an ankle could create serious complications far from medical help. After nearly 2 hours, the wheel is secured well enough to continue. The procession resumes. Slowly, steadily, patiently, clouds begin gathering during the afternoon. At first little more than scattered white patches drifting lazily across the sky. Few people pay much attention. Spring weather changes frequently on the Great Plains. Then the wind shifts. The pleasant breeze grows stronger. Loose hats require a firmer grip. Canvas wagon covers begin snapping loudly. Someone glances toward the western horizon, where darker clouds are building with surprising speed. Experienced travelers exchange uneasy looks. Storms on the prairie often arrive far faster than newcomers expect. Within half an hour, the sunlight fades beneath thick gray clouds. The air feels strangely heavy, almost electric. Birds become quieter. Even the oxen seem restless, tossing their heads as gusts of wind sweep across the open land. A command travels along the wagon train to prepare for rough weather. Canvas coverings are tightened, loose supplies secured, children brought closer. Rain begins almost without warning. Large cold drops strike the dusty earth, leaving dark circles that disappear almost instantly. Then comes another shower. Another. Within moments, the gentle rainfall transforms into a steady downpour. The trail changes before your eyes. Dust becomes mud. Hard ground softens. Wagon wheels begin sinking deeper with every rotation. Walking becomes more difficult as heavy boots collect thick layers of sticky clay. Each step feels noticeably heavier than the last. Thunder rolls across the prairie, deep enough to vibrate through your chest. Lightning flashes somewhere beyond the distant hills. Despite the miserable conditions, stopping immediately is rarely an option. Campsites must still be chosen carefully. Remaining in low ground risks flooding if rainfall continues. Everyone presses onward. Clothing becomes soaked. Blankets inside the wagons are checked repeatedly to ensure they remain dry beneath the canvas. Wet bedding can make several nights profoundly uncomfortable. After what feels like hours, the rain gradually weakens. The clouds drift eastward. Sunlight cautiously returns. Steam rises from the warming earth, carrying with it the rich smell of wet soil and crushed grass. The prairie looks transformed. Every blade of grass glitters beneath tiny droplets. Small pools of water reflect the afternoon sky. Birds resume singing as though nothing unusual has happened. Nature recovers quickly. People recover more slowly. Boots squish with every step. Socks remain damp. Hands have become wrinkled from rainwater. The wagons are streaked with fresh mud from wheel to canvas roof. By the time evening approaches, the families find a campsite on slightly elevated ground beside a shallow creek. Once again, work begins before rest can even be considered. Wet clothing is hung wherever possible. Small fires struggle against damp wood. Smoke curls thickly through the camp, making eyes water almost as much as the lingering wind. Dinner is warmer than usual, partly because everyone craves it after the storm. Beans simmer slowly inside blackened iron pots, while strips of salt pork add precious flavor. Fresh bread is impossible, but a simple meal eaten beside a crackling fire somehow tastes richer than it would at home. As darkness settles across the prairie, conversation turns toward the weather. Some older travelers remark that this storm was relatively mild compared with others they have survived. They speak of hailstones larger than eggs, tornadoes twisting across open grasslands, and lightning that struck so close it killed livestock where they stood. The younger children listen with wide eyes. Parents quietly hope they never experience such storms themselves. Above the camp, the clouds finally part completely. One by one, the stars emerge again, brilliant against the blackness. The day's rain has settled the dust, leaving the night air unusually fresh. For a little while, it almost feels peaceful enough to forget that tomorrow will bring another 15 or 20 miles of walking. Another series of difficult decisions, and another step deeper into a wilderness from which turning back is becoming less and less likely. Morning returns beneath a sky scrubbed clean by the previous day's rain. The prairie glows with a freshness that seems almost impossible after weeks of dust. Tiny droplets cling to every blade of grass, sparkling whenever the first rays of sunlight reach across the rolling land. For a few precious moments, the world feels quiet enough that you can hear insects stirring in the weeds and birds greeting the day from scattered cottonwood trees near the creek. The peaceful beginning does not last long. Someone is already checking the livestock before breakfast. Another emigrant kneels beside a wagon wheel, running rough fingers across the iron rim to make sure it has not loosened during yesterday's soaking rain. Moisture causes wood to swell, then shrink again under the afternoon sun. A wheel that seems perfectly secure one morning can become dangerously loose by evening. These small inspections rarely attract much attention, yet they often prevent disasters farther down the trail. The camp gradually comes alive. Smoke curls upward from dozens of cooking fires, carrying the familiar scent of bacon grease and wood smoke across the cool air. Tin cups clink against kettles. Oxen snort impatiently while waiting to be yoked. Children stretch stiff muscles, some still wrapped in blankets, because the chill lingers longer than expected. Breakfast is almost identical to yesterday's. No one complains. Complaining uses energy that is better saved for walking. One little girl quietly asks her mother when they will have fresh apples again. Her mother smiles gently before answering. When we reach Oregon, the child nods as though Oregon is only a few days away. The adults know better. After eating, the wagons once again form a long procession stretching across the prairie. From the front, the line resembles a slow-moving caravan disappearing over distant hills. From the rear, it seems endless, each white canvas cover rising and falling like ships crossing an ocean of grass. The comparison is fitting. Many emigrants later describe the Great Plains as a sea. The grass moves like waves. The horizon never seems to end. There are no landmarks for hours at a time. Sometimes, after walking an entire morning, it feels as though the landscape has barely changed. This endless sameness creates its own kind of exhaustion. You begin measuring progress differently, not by mountains, not by towns, but by streams crossed, meals eaten, campfires extinguished, souls worn thinner beneath your boots. As the sun climbs higher, the trail grows busier than expected. Your wagon train is no longer alone. Ahead, another company of emigrants has slowed to repair several wagons. Behind them, a third train approaches from the east, its canvas tops shimmering in the morning light. During the busiest years of westward migration, hundreds of wagons may travel portions of the Oregon Trail within the same season. This offers comfort. It also creates problems. The ground nearest the trail becomes stripped of grass after thousands of hungry animals graze upon it. Fresh water grows murkier where countless wagons stop to refill barrels. Firewood becomes increasingly scarce near popular campsites. The farther west everyone travels, the more visible these signs become. Late in the morning, the wagons approach a broad meadow where hundreds of cattle belonging to another company are already feeding. The sight is impressive. Large oxen lower their heads into the tall grass, while bells hanging from their necks ring softly in the breeze. Horses flick their tails at persistent flies. Several boys no older than 14 ride slowly around the herd, preventing curious animals from wandering too far. Your own livestock watches them with interest. Keeping animals healthy becomes one of the greatest concerns throughout the journey. A wagon without food is in trouble. A wagon without working oxen may stop forever. Each animal consumes an enormous amount of grass every day. They require water, rest, and careful attention. Their shoulders develop sores beneath heavy wooden yokes. Their hooves wear down across rocky ground. If one becomes lame, the entire family's future suddenly hangs in the balance. Some emigrants become surprisingly attached to their teams. They give the oxen names, speak to them softly, scratch behind their ears during rest stops. After all, these patient creatures pull nearly everything the family owns. They are companions as much as livestock. By midday, the heat begins building once more. Yesterday's rain has vanished beneath bright sunshine. Steam no longer rises from the earth. Instead, warmth shimmers above the grasslands. The lunch stop is brief. Water is collected from a narrow creek flowing gently between muddy banks. Several women wash cooking pots, while children eagerly splash their hands in the cool water before being reminded not to waste it. A father removes his boots. The skin beneath is raw. One blister has burst. Another is beginning to form. He quietly cleans his feet before wrapping them with strips torn from an old shirt. There is no doctor nearby to offer treatment. Most emigrants become their own physicians, relying upon practical experience, homemade remedies, and advice shared among neighbors. Minor injuries are accepted as part of daily life. Cuts, bruises, splinters, sunburn, a twisted ankle, each must simply be managed as best as possible. The afternoon march continues beneath an increasingly cloudless sky. Then something appears on the distant horizon. Dark shapes. At first they seem like low hills. Gradually they begin moving. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Someone quietly says a single word. Buffalo. Excitement spreads through the wagon train. Children climb onto wagon, tongues for a better view. Adults shade their eyes against the bright sunlight. The herd stretches farther than anyone can easily count. American bison still roam portions of the Great Plains in astonishing numbers during the 1840s. Their massive bodies roll across the landscape like living waves. Dust rises behind them while calves remain close beside their mothers. The ground itself seems to tremble beneath their movement. Many emigrants have never witnessed anything so extraordinary. For several minutes, nearly everyone simply watches. The animals remain distant enough that there is little danger. But experienced hunters know how unpredictable they can become if frightened. A few young men ask permission to hunt. Fresh meat would be welcome after so many meals of salted pork and dried food. The wagon captain agrees, though only after reminding them not to travel too far from the company. Several riders disappear toward the herd, carrying long rifles. The rest continue moving. Hours later, the hunters return. Success. A young buffalo has been harvested. The work now begins. Butchering an animal on the open prairie demands strength, skill, and speed. Large cuts of meat are divided among multiple families, while strips are prepared for drying over smoky fires. Nothing useful is discarded. The hide may later become leather. Bones can produce tools. Fat may be rendered into tallow. Fresh meat lifts spirits throughout the camp that evening. For many families, It is the finest meal they have enjoyed since leaving Missouri. The smell drifting from dozens of campfires is richer than usual. Children grin while chewing meat that has not been soaked in salt for months. Even the adults seem lighter in conversation. Stories begin flowing more easily after supper. One elderly traveler recalls crossing the Appalachian Mountains as a child decades earlier. Another remembers seeing steamboats for the first time on the Mississippi River. A grandmother quietly describes the orchard she left behind in Ohio, wondering aloud whether the apple trees are blooming without her this spring. No one interrupts. Everyone has left something behind. A favorite chair, a family grave, a familiar church bell, neighbors known for decades. The Oregon Trail is not only a journey towards something new, it is also a slow farewell to an older life. As darkness settles, coyotes begin calling somewhere beyond the edge of camp. Their high, wavering voices drift across the open prairie. The younger children instinctively move closer to the fire. Adults smile reassuringly. Coyotes are rarely a serious threat to people. The livestock, however, remains carefully watched. Before sleeping, several men walk quietly around the perimeter of the wagons, making certain every ox and horse is securely tethered. Animals sometimes wander during the night, and finding them again can consume valuable hours the following morning. The stars emerge one after another. The fire burns lower. Someone softly sings an old hymn that many families know by heart. Gradually, conversations fade. Only the gentle crackle of dying embers and the distant sound of grazing oxen remain. Tomorrow promises another ordinary day on the trail. No one yet realizes that the ordinary rhythm they have begun to trust will soon be interrupted, not by weather or broken wagons, but by one of the greatest invisible enemies every emigrant fears. Disease travels much faster than any wagon, and unlike mud, storms, or worn-out boots, it cannot always be seen until it is already among the families. The prairie wakes beneath a thin veil of mist that hangs low over the grass, softening the landscape until the horizon almost disappears. For a few quiet minutes, every wagon seems suspended in a world made only of pale light, damp earth, and distant birdsong. The familiar sounds of camp begin gently rather than all at once. A kettle lid rattles against an iron pot. Someone coughs while blowing on a reluctant fire. Leather creaks as harnesses are lifted from the ground where they rested overnight. Most mornings now feel comfortably predictable. That predictability is one of the few luxuries available on the trail. People know what comes next without needing to discuss it. Breakfast, packing, harnessing the oxen, walking, stopping briefly at midday, walking again, finding water before sunset, preparing another simple meal, sleeping beneath stars that somehow appear brighter every evening. Routine helps keep worry at a distance. When people remain busy, they have less time to think about everything that might go wrong. Yet this morning, something feels different. A young boy from one of the neighboring wagons has not come outside with the other children. His mother remains beside him while everyone else prepares to leave. At first, no one pays much attention. Children often wake tired after long days on the trail. Perhaps he simply did not sleep well. Perhaps yesterday's excitement over the buffalo herd left him exhausted. The wagons begin rolling shortly after sunrise. The family's wagon falls toward the middle of the procession, instead of its usual place near the front. As the morning passes, whispers begin spreading from wagon to wagon. The boy has a fever. No one says the word loudly. No one needs to. Fever is one of the most feared signs on the Oregon Trail. Nearly every emigrant understands that sickness can transform an ordinary journey into a tragedy with astonishing speed. Modern travelers are accustomed to pharmacies, hospitals, and physicians only minutes away. Families on the Oregon Trail have none of these comforts. If someone becomes seriously ill, there may be no trained doctor within hundreds of miles. The remedies carried inside the wagons are practical but limited. Small bottles of castor oil, laudanum for severe pain, quinine for certain fevers, simple herbs gathered before departure, bandages stitched from old linen. Most families also carry a medical handbook purchased back east. These books contain advice for treating dozens of illnesses, though the recommendations are not always effective. Some treatments later prove helpful. Others accomplish very little. A few make matters worse without anyone realizing it. Knowledge in the middle of the 19th century is improving, but many important discoveries still lie in the future. The idea that invisible germs spread disease has not yet become widely accepted. People speak instead of bad air, poor weather, exhaustion, or mysterious influences that cannot easily be explained. As the wagons continue westward, the sick boy grows quieter. His father walks beside the wagon instead of leading the oxen, glancing inside every few moments. His mother places a cool cloth across his forehead. The child asks for water, then falls asleep again. The rest of the wagon train maintains its steady pace. Stopping for every illness would make reaching Oregon nearly impossible. It is one of the harsh realities of the journey. Life continues moving, even when individual families are struggling. By late morning, another traveler begins coughing. This time, it is an elderly woman. Her cough is deep and persistent, echoing across the otherwise peaceful prairie. She insists she is fine. Everyone politely pretends to believe her. The truth is simpler. Most people refuse to admit weakness unless absolutely necessary. Every traveler understands that becoming unable to walk creates additional burdens for family members already carrying enormous responsibilities. The sun climbs steadily higher. Heat settles across the open grasslands, flies become more numerous. They gather around livestock, around cooking supplies, and around every place where food is prepared. Children wave them away with little success. Lunch is taken beside a shallow creek bordered by willow trees. The water appears clear enough, gently flowing over smooth stones. Several families immediately begin filling barrels. Others hesitate. An older emigrant points upstream. There, perhaps half a mile away, another wagon company has already stopped. Their oxen stand directly in the water. Several people are washing clothing near the bank. One man appears to be cleaning cooking pots. Without realizing it, hundreds of emigrants along the trail often share the same streams in ways that make illness increasingly likely. No one intends to contaminate the water. Most simply, do not understand how disease spreads. Some families choose to boil their drinking water before filling containers. Others drink directly from the creek. The difference may not become apparent for several days. After lunch, the trail crosses a stretch of unusually uneven ground. Countless wagon wheels have carved deep ruts into the earth during previous seasons. The recent rain has hardened into rough ridges. Walking becomes awkward. Every step demands attention. One misplaced foot could easily twist an ankle. The wagons sway from side to side as wheels climb in and out of old tracks. Inside, boxes shift with dull thuds despite careful packing. A glass jar finally gives way inside one wagon. The sharp sound of breaking glass briefly interrupts the steady rhythm of the journey. No one laughs. Every broken possession is one less useful item for the months still ahead. By mid-afternoon, the sick boy begins crying softly. His fever has worsened. The wagon captain quietly rides back to check on the family. There is little he can actually do. He offers encouragement, suggests resting at the next suitable campsite, asks whether anyone carries additional medicine. Several neighboring families contribute what they can: a spoonful of dried herbs, a clean cloth, a little extra tea. Small acts of kindness become surprisingly common on the trail. People understand that tomorrow they themselves may require help. The prairie, vast as it is, encourages cooperation. Isolation is dangerous. As the day continues, conversation among the adults grows more subdued. Stories and laughter give way to practical discussions. How much flour remains? Have the oxen lost weight? Will the next river be difficult to cross? Does anyone know how far it is to the Platte? These questions matter because certainty has become a rare luxury. Distances are often estimated rather than measured. Guidebooks disagree. Rumors travel faster than facts. One traveler insists there is an excellent campsite only 2 days ahead. Another claims the grass there has already been eaten bare by earlier wagon trains. No one knows which version is correct. Toward evening, the company finally reaches a broad meadow where a winding stream offers fresh grass for the animals. The wagons circle loosely rather than forming a complete defensive ring. Contrary to popular legend, wagons are not arranged in circles every single night. They are positioned according to the terrain, available water, and practical convenience. After unharnessing the oxen, several boys lead them toward the richest patches of grass while keeping a careful watch. Healthy animals tomorrow depend upon good grazing tonight. Meanwhile, the camp settles into its familiar evening rhythm. Smoke rises, pots simmer, needles mend torn shirts, boots are repaired with waxed thread. Children, despite their fatigue, still manage to invent games using smooth stones gathered from the creek. For a little while, life almost resembles an ordinary family camping trip. Then the boy's condition worsens. His breathing becomes noticeably faster. His cheeks burn with fever. His mother no longer joins the others around the fire. Instead, she remains inside the wagon, speaking softly to him while wiping perspiration from his face. The father sits nearby, staring silently into the flames. Several neighbors stop by to offer comfort. No grand speeches are made. No miraculous remedies appear. Sometimes companionship is the only gift available. The evening grows cooler. Crickets begin singing in the tall grass. Far above, the first stars appear one by one. Most of the children drift off to sleep surprisingly quickly after another long day. The adults linger awake. They speak quietly about families they once knew who attempted the journey in previous years. Some reached Oregon successfully. Others turned back. A few simply vanished from later accounts. Their names remembered only in old letters or fatting diary entries. No one says it aloud, but everyone understands the uncomfortable truth. The Oregon Trail does not treat every family equally. Good planning helps. Strong oxen help. Good weather helps. Even determination helps. But luck also travels beside every wagon. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it quietly disappears. Long after the campfires have burned down to glowing embers, the sick child's mother is still awake. She listens to every breath. Hopping each one will be a little stronger than the last. Outside, the prairie remains calm, beneath a sky crowded with countless stars. It is almost impossible to believe that a landscape so peaceful can hide dangers that cannot be seen, touched, or outrun. And as another dawn slowly approaches beyond the eastern horizon, the wagon train prepares to enter a stage of the journey where the greatest challenges will no longer come from broken wheels or muddy roads, but from the fragile limits of the human body itself. The eastern sky slowly changes from black to deep blue, and then to a pale ribbon of silver stretching across the horizon. One by one, the stars disappear, fading into the growing light until only the brightest remain. The prairie is unusually still this morning. Even the wind seems reluctant to disturb the quiet that has settled over the camp. No one slept particularly well. Several families found themselves waking repeatedly during the night, listening for sounds from the wagon where the sick child rested. Before sunrise, his fever finally began to ease, only slightly. His mother notices that his forehead no longer feels quite as hot as it did during the darkest hours of the night. His breathing is steadier, though he remains too weak to sit up for very long. She allows herself a cautious moment of relief. Around the camp, others are quietly encouraged by the news, but no one celebrates. Experience has already taught them not to assume that improvement always lasts. Morning chores continue as they always do. Fires are lit. Coffee is brewed where supplies permit. A few families cook porridge instead of frying salt pork, hopping to conserve the meat they have carried since leaving Missouri. Flour barrels are opened carefully, their lids immediately replaced to keep moisture and insects away. One elderly emigrant kneels beside a sack of beans, removing tiny stones before they are cooked. It is patient, repetitive work, yet nearly every meal requires some kind of preparation like this. Food purchased months earlier often contains bits of dirt, broken husks, or small pebbles that slipped in during harvesting. Nothing arrives neatly packaged. Everything requires effort. Nearby, two young sisters are given an important task. They collect buffalo chips that dried in the sun days earlier. The girls carry them in woven baskets, almost as though gathering firewood. At first glance, the work appears unpleasant, but out here on the open plains, dried buffalo dung burns surprisingly well and often serves as the only available fuel for cooking. The children have already grown accustomed to it. One of them wrinkles her nose, only because her older sister does the same. Their father smiles quietly. Only a few weeks ago, both girls would have refused to touch such things. The trail has a remarkable way of changing what people consider normal. By the time the wagons begin moving again, the sun is already warming the grass. Dew evaporates into the air, leaving behind the sweet smell of growing prairie, mixed with the earthy scent of damp soil. The procession stretches westward once more, wheel after wheel, yoke after yoke, step after steady step. Walking eventually becomes less about putting one foot in front of the other, and more about finding a rhythm that conserves strength. Experienced emigrants discover that a consistent pace matters far more than speed. Walking too quickly during the cool morning often leads to exhaustion long before the afternoon. The oxen understand this better than anyone. They never hurry, no matter how urgently their drivers call out. The animals maintain their deliberate, patient pace. Sometimes newcomers become frustrated. They tug the reins, raise their voices, wave long whips through the air. The older teamsters simply shake their heads. You cannot rush an ox. It is advice, repeated countless times along the Oregon Trail. Eventually, nearly everyone learns to accept it. As the hours pass, the prairie gradually begins changing. The endless ocean of tall grass becomes interrupted by patches of low shrubs and scattered groves of cottonwood trees. Small streams appear more frequently, cutting winding paths through shallow valleys. Bird life becomes more abundant as well. Red-winged blackbirds perch on reeds near marshy ground. Hawks circle lazily overhead, their sharp eyes searching for mice hidden beneath the grass. Occasionally, a flock of wild ducks rises suddenly from a pond, their wings producing a rush of sound that startles children walking nearby. Nature continues its daily routines with complete indifference to the passing wagon trains. The emigrants are merely temporary visitors. Late in the morning, one of the scouts riding ahead signals for the wagons to slow. A narrow bridge spans a modest creek. Calling it a bridge is perhaps generous. It is little more than heavy logs laid across the water, with rough planks placed on top. Time and weather have not been kind to it. Several boards sag noticeably. Others have shifted slightly out of place. The current beneath is gentle, but the crossing demands caution. One wagon at a time. No exceptions. The first team approaches carefully. The oxen hesitate. One lowers its head, sniffing the unfamiliar surface beneath its hooves. Its driver speaks softly rather than shouting. Patient encouragement proves more effective than force. Slowly, the team begins crossing. The bridge groans beneath the tremendous weight. Every creak seems louder than the last. Families waiting behind watch silently. If the bridge fails, rebuilding it could consume an entire day. Fortunately, it holds. One wagon follows another. Children are instructed to walk rather than ride during the crossing, reducing the weight as much as possible. Even so, every successful crossing is met with visible relief. By midday, everyone has reached the opposite bank. Lunch is eaten beneath the welcome shade of several large cottonwood trees. Their leaves flutter constantly in the breeze, producing a gentle whispering sound, unlike anything heard out on the open prairie. Some travelers remove their boots completely, allowing sore feet to breathe. Others wash shirts in the creek before spreading them across bushes to dry. One woman carefully patches a tear in the canvas cover of her wagon. A hole no larger than a hand might seem insignificant today, but during a heavy storm, it could allow enough rain inside to soak blankets, clothing, and precious food supplies. Maintenance never truly ends. Everything is inspected. Everything is repaired before it becomes a larger problem. As the afternoon begins, the trail grows noticeably busier. Another wagon company approaches from the west. Unlike your own train, these people are traveling east. They have already completed the journey to Oregon and are returning for reasons known only to themselves. Meeting travelers coming from the opposite direction is always an important moment. Both companies stop. Hands are shaken. Questions immediately follow. How are the river crossings ahead? Is there enough grass? Have you seen any large buffalo herds? How far to the Platte? The answers come calmly, offered without exaggeration. One older man advises everyone to be careful with their livestock. Grass becomes thinner farther west, he explains. Another warns that several difficult river crossings still lie ahead. A woman quietly mentions that children in another wagon train became ill several weeks earlier. The conversations last perhaps 20 minutes. Then both groups continue on their separate journeys. They will almost certainly never meet again. The encounter leaves everyone thoughtful. The travelers heading east look different. Their clothing is more worn. Their faces are darker from months beneath the sun. Many have grown leaner. There is confidence in the way they walk. Not excitement, experience. They carry themselves like people who have learned difficult lessons. As afternoon light begins softening, the landscape opens once again into broad grasslands stretching beyond sight. A warm wind sweeps steadily from the south. It bends the tall grasses until they ripple like waves across an enormous green sea. Walking beside the wagon, you begin noticing how every family has developed its own quiet habits. One father whistles softly while guiding his oxen. Another counts each mile aloud, using landmarks described in his guidebook. A grandmother knits whenever the wagon pauses, somehow producing neat stitches despite the constant movement. One young boy spends hours searching for unusual feathers, carefully placing each one inside a small leather pouch tied to his belt. These tiny routines provide comfort. They remind people that life is still made of ordinary moments, even in extraordinary circumstances. Toward evening, the wagon captain chooses a campsite overlooking a gentle bend in the creek. The setting sun paints the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretch across the grass. The day's heat slowly fades. Dinner is prepared much as it has been every evening. But tonight conversation flows more freely than it has in several days. The sick child has managed to eat a small bowl of porridge. He even smiled briefly when his younger sister showed him a smooth stone she had found beside the creek. It is only a tiny improvement. Yet on the Oregon Trail, tiny improvements often feel like enormous victories. As darkness settles over the camp, someone begins quietly reading from a worn family Bible. Not everyone gathers around to listen. Some continue mending harnesses. Others polish rifles or repair boots by the fading light. The words drift gently across the evening air, blending with the steady chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of grazing oxen. One by one, the campfires shrink into glowing circles of red. Above them, the stars return in astonishing numbers. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a pale road pointing westward, as though even the sky itself is reminding every traveler that the journey has only just begun. Far ahead, beyond hundreds of miles of prairie, rivers, and mountains, waits a crossing that every emigrant has heard about and many quietly fear. It is broad, cold, unpredictable, and capable of ending a family's dream in a matter of minutes. Before long, the steady creak of wagon wheels will give way to the sound of rushing water. Morning arrives beneath a sky so clear that the horizon seems impossibly distant. The first sunlight washes over the prairie in soft bands of gold, revealing a world already stirring with quiet activity. Birds dart between patches of tall grass in search of insects, while a pair of jackrabbits disappear over a low rise before anyone can point them out to the children. The camp wakes more slowly than it did during the first weeks of the journey. Fatigue has settled into every family. It is no longer the sharp soreness of unfamiliar work, but a steady weariness that lingers from one day to the next. Muscles have grown stronger, yet they never seem fully rested. Boots are broken in, though feet continue to ache. Hands have become rougher, darker, and marked with countless small cuts from rope, wood, and iron. Breakfast is simple. A pot of cornmeal mush bubbles gently over the fire, while strips of dried meat warm beside it. Someone passes around a small tin of molasses, allowing each child only the smallest taste. The sweetness disappears almost instantly, but for a moment it reminds everyone of kitchens left behind hundreds of miles to the east. As families prepare to leave, a faint ringing echoes across the camp. One of the oxen has wandered farther than expected during the night. Its bell can still be heard somewhere beyond a shallow hill, but the animal itself is hidden by the tall grass. 3 men volunteer to retrieve it. No one considers continuing without them. Finding a single wandering ox may seem like a minor inconvenience, yet losing one could threaten the entire journey. A wagon loaded with nearly everything a family owns cannot simply be pulled by fewer animals without placing dangerous strain on those that remain. The search takes nearly an hour. The ox is eventually discovered grazing contentedly beside a small pond, entirely unaware of the concern it has caused. When it is finally led back into camp, several children laugh quietly, as though the animal had played a harmless prank. The adults smile too, though mostly out of relief. Not every search ends so well. Sometimes frightened livestock travel for miles before they can be recovered. Sometimes they are never found at all. The wagons begin moving shortly afterward, their wheels leaving fresh impressions in the slightly damp earth. The trail ahead appears almost peaceful. Wide grasslands stretch beneath an endless blue sky, interrupted only by scattered groves of cottonwood and willow. The air is pleasantly cool, making the morning's walk far more comfortable than those taken under the blazing afternoon sun. As the company settles into its familiar rhythm, the sounds blend together into something almost musical. The slow clink of harness chains, the steady creak of wooden axles, soft commands spoken to the oxen, children chatting beside the wagons, the distant call of meadowlarks floating across the prairie. After enough days, these sounds become the soundtrack of daily life. Silence, when it arrives, feels almost unusual. Late in the morning, the land begins sloping gently downward toward a broad valley. At its center winds a river, not especially large, not especially fast, yet every traveler studies it carefully. Streams and rivers demand respect regardless of their size. A crossing that appears simple from a distance may conceal deep holes, soft mud, or unexpectedly strong currents. The wagon captain rides ahead with several experienced men to examine the ford. The rest of the company waits patiently beneath the warm sun. Children take advantage of the pause by skipping flat stones across the water. Women refill buckets and wash cooking utensils. Several men inspect wagon wheels once again, tightening bolts and applying fresh grease to axles while there is time. Nothing on the Oregon Trail rewards impatience. Eventually, the scouts return. The crossing is considered safe. Still, precautions must be taken. Heavy items are rearranged inside each wagon to improve balance. Loose barrels are secured with extra rope. Children are instructed to remain calm and follow directions exactly. One by one, the wagons descend the riverbank. The first pair of oxen enters the water cautiously. Cold water climbs slowly past their knees. Then higher, the wagon behind them rocks gently as its wheels disappear beneath the surface. Everyone watches. No one speaks. The river reaches the hubs of the wheels. For a tense moment, the current presses firmly against the wagon's broad wooden sides. The oxen continue, pulling with steady determination. Step after patient step, water swirls around their legs, carrying bits of grass and fallen branches downstream. Finally, the front wheels begin climbing the opposite bank. The wagon tilts upward, then levels once more. A quiet sigh of relief spreads through the waiting families. The first crossing is successful. Each wagon follows in turn. Most pass without incident. One wagon becomes briefly stuck when a rear wheel sinks into soft mud near the middle of the ford. The oxen strain against their yokes. The chains tighten. For several long seconds, nothing happens. Then additional men wade into the chilly water. Shoulders press against the wagon. Boots sink deep into the muddy riverbed. With a great heave, the wheel breaks free. The wagon lurches forward. Cheers are unnecessary. The relieved smiles say enough. By early afternoon, everyone has crossed safely. Wet boots are removed during the lunch stop and left to dry beneath the warm sun. Children, delighted by the unexpected adventure, compare whose trousers became the wettest. One proudly claims the water reached nearly to his waist. His mother gently reminds him that exaggeration grows as quickly as prairie grass. The company laughs. Moments like these are surprisingly valuable. They remind everyone that Yet not every challenge ends in disaster. As the journey continues, signs of earlier wagon trains become increasingly common. Discarded wagon tongues lie beside the trail, abandoned after breaking beyond repair. Here and there, rusting iron tires from old wheels rest half buried in the grass. A cracked barrel sits beneath a lone tree. An old chair, too heavy to justify carrying farther, slowly weathers beneath the open sky. Each abandoned object tells a quiet story. Families rarely leave possessions behind willingly. Everything packed into a wagon was chosen after difficult decisions. If something has been discarded, it almost certainly became too damaged, too heavy, or too unnecessary to continue carrying. The trail itself becomes a kind of museum without walls, evidence of thousands who passed before, evidence that every mile demands sacrifice. Toward the middle of the afternoon, your eyes catch something else beside the road. A simple wooden marker, no larger than a fence post. Its rough surface has been carved with a name and a date. Nothing more. There are no flowers, no stone monument, only weathered wood leaning slightly beneath the prairie wind. The wagon train slows almost instinctively. Conversation fades. Nobody needs to explain what the marker represents. Graves appear from time to time along the Oregon Trail. Some are carefully fenced with stones. Others are marked only by wooden crosses. Many have no markers at all, to protect the resting places from animals and erosion. Families sometimes buried loved ones directly beneath the trail itself, allowing countless wagon wheels to pass overhead. It was a heartbreaking decision, but one intended to prevent graves from being disturbed on the open prairie. No one lingers long. The journey leaves little opportunity for extended mourning. Yet nearly every traveler removes a hat or bows a head while passing. The children notice this gesture. One little boy quietly asks his father, who is buried there. The man looks toward the weathered marker before answering, "I don't know." It is perhaps the saddest response of all. A life reduced to a fading name beside a road stretching toward the horizon. The wagons continue west. The marker gradually disappears behind them until it becomes only another small shape in the distance. That evening, camp is made on a gentle rise, overlooking miles of open prairie. The setting sun turns the grasses into a sea of copper and gold. After supper, people sit quietly around their fires, speaking more softly than usual. No one mentions the grave directly. There is no need. Its presence lingers in everyone's thoughts. The Oregon Trail is filled with hope. It is also filled with reminders that hope always walks beside uncertainty. As darkness settles over the plains, coyotes begin their nightly chorus somewhere far beyond the grazing oxen. The sound rises and falls beneath a sky crowded with stars. Tomorrow, the trail will continue exactly as it always has. Another sunrise, another march westward, another collection of ordinary moments that, taken together, will slowly carry these families toward the distant mountains that now exist only in their imaginations. Though with each passing day they draw a little closer to becoming real, the next morning arrives with a gentle breeze flowing across the prairie, carrying the cool scent of wild sage and damp grass. Thin wisps of cloud drift lazily overhead, painted pink and gold by the rising sun. For a brief while, the world seems almost too peaceful to believe that thousands of people are slowly carving a road across it. The camp awakens in familiar fashion. Someone stirs a kettle with a wooden spoon. Another person shakes yesterday's blankets free of dust before folding them tightly. Oxen stretch their thick necks as they are led toward their yokes, snorting quietly while flicking flies away with slow, deliberate movements of their tails. The routine has become second nature. Nobody asks what needs to be done. Everyone simply begins doing it. Even the youngest children have discovered small responsibilities that make them feel useful. One little boy carefully gathers kindling no thicker than his thumb. A girl scarcely older than 8 carries empty tin cups to the creek before breakfast. Another child walks from wagon to wagon, collecting eggs from the few chickens that have somehow continued laying despite the constant movement. Not every family attempts to bring chickens. They require care, consume precious feed, and do not always survive the long journey. Those that do are treated almost like treasured companions. Fresh eggs are a luxury that many wagon trains have long since exhausted. As breakfast comes to an end, one of the older men unfolds a worn map that has been repaired so many times its creases are nearly white. Several travelers gather around him, studying the faded lines with thoughtful expressions. The map is useful. It is not perfect. Many maps of the period are based upon reports from explorers, trappers, missionaries, military expeditions, and emigrants who measured distances as best they could while traveling. Rivers sometimes appear slightly misplaced. Hills seem lower on paper than they do in reality. Certain landmarks are described in remarkable detail, while others are mentioned only in passing. The Oregon Trail itself is less a single road than a network of well-worn paths that shift from season to season. Heavy rains create new ruts. Flooded streams force temporary detours. Grass worn bare by thousands of oxen encourages later travelers to move a little farther, north or south. The trail is constantly changing. After breaking camp, the wagon train continues west beneath bright sunshine. The morning passes comfortably. Prairie dogs begin appearing in greater numbers than before. Their colonies spread across broad stretches of open ground, marked by hundreds of small earthen mounds. Every so often, one of the tiny animals pops upright beside its burrow, standing perfectly still while observing the strange procession of wagons. Children delight in watching them. They're waving, one little girl whispers. Her older brother insists they are acting as guards, warning the others whenever danger approaches. The adults smile without correcting either explanation. There is something comforting about seeing children continue to imagine stories despite the demanding journey. One adventurous dog belonging to a nearby family becomes fascinated by the prairie dogs, ignoring repeated whistles from its owner. It races across the grass in determined pursuit. Within moments, every prairie dog has disappeared underground. The dog skids to a stop, looking utterly confused. It circles several empty burrows before eventually trotting back toward the wagons, apparently disappointed by the sudden disappearance of its quarry. Laughter ripples through the company. Simple moments like these become treasured memories. There are no theaters, no newspapers, no evening concerts. Entertainment often arrives unexpectedly, created by nature itself or by the ordinary behavior of people and animals. By late morning, the wind begins strengthening. At first, no one pays much attention. A breeze is welcome after several warm days. Gradually, however, it becomes more persistent. Loose hats require firmer hands. Women's bonnets tug against their ribbons. Canvas wagon covers snap sharply with every stronger gust. Dust, which yesterday seemed settled after crossing the river, once again rises into the air. Within an hour, the horizon appears slightly hazy. The prairie has an extraordinary ability to produce dust. Each wagon contributes its own cloud. Multiply that by hundreds of wagons, thousands of oxen, horses, cattle, and people, and the result becomes a drifting curtain that hangs over the trail for miles. Families traveling near the rear of a large wagon train often endure the worst of it. The air becomes thick enough that distant wagons fade into pale outlines. People tie handkerchiefs across their noses. Eyes sting. Teeth crunch faintly against grit. Even drinking water acquires a dusty taste before the day is over. One emigrant later writes in his diary that dust seemed capable of finding places he had never imagined possible. It settled inside folded clothing, inside flour sacks, inside rifle barrels, between the pages of books, even beneath tightly fastened wagon covers. There was simply no escaping it. Around midday, the wagons halt beside a small grove of elm trees, whose shade feels wonderfully cool after hours beneath the open sky. Lunch is prepared with practiced efficiency. Beans simmer slowly. A few slices of smoked ham appear from carefully packed barrels. One woman surprises several neighboring children by producing a small sack of dried apples she has been saving since the journey began. She shares them sparingly. Each child receives only a single slice. The fruit is leathery and far from fresh, yet the sweetness lingers pleasantly, reminding everyone of orchards left behind. During the meal, conversations drift toward memories of home. A farmer describes the sound of rain falling upon the roof of his barn. His wife remembers tending roses beside their front porch. Another traveler laughs while recalling how his old mule repeatedly escaped through the same broken section of fence every spring. For a little while, the prairie disappears from their thoughts. Memory carries them eastward, even as their wagons continue west. The afternoon march resumes beneath increasingly dusty skies. The landscape remains beautiful, though its beauty has become quieter now. People notice details rather than grand views. The delicate purple flowers growing beside a stream, the curious tracks left overnight by raccoons near the water's edge, the endless variety of clouds changing shape throughout the afternoon. The trail teaches observation. Walking 15 or 20 miles every day leaves ample time to notice things that might otherwise pass unseen. Later in the afternoon, a shout comes from near the front of the company. The line slows, not because of danger, because several enormous wagons have become wedged in a particularly narrow section of the trail, where erosion has cut steep banks on either side. Passing through requires patience. Each driver carefully guides the wheels, while others stand nearby, offering directions. A little left. Hold there. Easy now. The oxen respond with remarkable calm. One wagon tilts alarmingly toward the bank before settling safely back onto level ground. The entire process takes nearly an hour. Nobody complains. The Oregon Trail teaches patience, perhaps, better than any school ever could. Everything requires time. Crossing rivers, repairing wheels, finding lost livestock, preparing meals, even waiting for another wagon to clear a difficult section of road. Impatience rarely makes any task faster. As evening approaches, the wind finally begins to weaken. Dust slowly settles onto the grass once again. The wagon train reaches a campsite overlooking a broad stretch of prairie that glows amber beneath the lowering sun. The view extends for miles in every direction. There are no fences, no houses, no church steeples, only grass, sky, and the long trail stretching back toward the eastern states. After supper, a young man removes a small fiddle from a wooden case, padded carefully with blankets. The instrument has survived weeks of jolting travel. He tunes it slowly, listening to each string until it sounds just right. Then he begins to play. The melody is simple, gentle, familiar to many gathered around the fires. Children sway sleepily beside their parents. Several older couples quietly hum along. No one attempts to dance. Everyone is too tired. Still, the music transforms the evening. For a few precious minutes, the hardships of the trail seem farther away. The prairie itself appears to pause and listen. When the final note fades into the cool night air, silence returns just as gently as the music had arrived. One by one, families retire to their blankets, The fires burn lower. The oxen graze peacefully beneath the stars. Far to the west, invisible beyond the darkness, the Platte River continues its long journey across the plains. Before many more days have passed, these emigrants will meet it, a river so broad that many first-time travelers mistake it for a lake, yet often so shallow that it earns a nickname few people forget. Along its banks, the landscape, the pace of travel, and the challenges of the journey will begin to change once again. The following morning begins with a cool wind blowing steadily from the northwest. It slips through the canvas covers of the wagons and rustles the prairie grass with a sound like countless whispers passing from one hill to the next. Overnight, the air has become noticeably drier. The damp scent left behind by earlier rains has disappeared, replaced by the clean fragrance of sun-warmed earth and sagebrush. Long before sunrise, one of the guards assigned to watch the livestock during the night quietly walks through the camp, waking the first families. There they are. He points toward a distant rise where the oxen can just be seen, scattered across the grass, exactly where they had been left to graze. A few years earlier, most of these animals had spent their lives inside fenced pastures. Now they have become travelers too. Each morning, they must be gathered before breakfast. It is a task requiring patience more than speed. The animals seldom come when called. Instead, several men and older boys spread out across the prairie, gently guiding them back toward camp in a slow-moving line. The bells hanging from a few of their necks produce soft, uneven chimes that drift through the cool morning air. By the time breakfast is ready, nearly every ox has returned. Only one stubborn animal decides that the grass beyond a shallow ridge looks far more appealing than the camp behind it. Its owner sighs, adjusts his hat, and begins another slow walk across the prairie. Nobody laughs. Everyone has owned a stubborn animal at some point. Breakfast is quieter than usual. The excitement of the first weeks has faded into comfortable routine. People have learned that mornings are often best spent conserving both food and conversation. Coffee is poured carefully. Flour is measured precisely. Even the children seem less eager to chatter before beginning another long day on foot. After the wagons are packed, the captain calls everyone together for a brief discussion. He stands beside his wagon with a folded guidebook tucked beneath one arm. The pages are stained from constant use. Corners have curled from countless readings. He explains that the company is drawing closer to one of the great landmarks of the plains. Soon they will begin following the Platte River. A ripple of quiet anticipation moves through the emigrants. Almost everyone has heard of the Platte before leaving home. Guidebooks mention it repeatedly. Letters from earlier settlers describe its long valley stretching across the Great Plains. For many travelers, reaching the Platte represents an important milestone. It is proof that the journey is truly progressing. The captain also offers a reminder. Stay together. The words are simple, yet everyone understands their importance. The farther west the trail extends, the greater the distance between settlements. Help becomes increasingly difficult to find. A family delayed by broken equipment or wandering livestock can quickly find itself traveling alone if the rest of the company moves too far ahead. The wagons begin rolling beneath a cloudless sky. Morning light spreads across the prairie, casting long shadows behind every moving wheel. Walking has become almost automatic. Your feet seem to know the rhythm before your mind fully wakes. The steady crunch of boots against dry soil blends naturally with the familiar groan of wooden wagons. Hours pass. The land changes almost imperceptibly. The rolling hills become broader. The grass grows slightly shorter. Small patches of sandy soil begin appearing beside the trail. The children notice fewer wildflowers than before. Instead, clusters of hardy shrubs seem better suited to the drier ground. One of the older travelers explains that the climate will continue changing as they move farther west. Rain becomes less dependable. Trees become scarcer. Water must be appreciated whenever it appears. Near mid-morning, a rider approaches from the east. He is traveling alone. His horse moves at an easy pace, showing signs of many miles already covered. As he draws near, he raises a hand in greeting. The wagon train slows. The stranger introduces himself as a trader, returning toward the Missouri frontier after spending the previous winter in the mountains. His clothing is noticeably different from that of most emigrants. His buckskin coat bears countless repairs. His hat has faded beneath years of sunlight. His beard is touched with gray despite a face that suggests he is not especially old. He carries little unnecessary weight. Years of travel have taught him exactly what is worth bringing. The emigrants gather around eagerly. Mountain men possess something more valuable than supplies. They possess knowledge. Questions arrive almost immediately. How are the trails ahead? Have the rivers begun rising with spring snowmelt? Is grass plentiful? Have there been any early snowstorms in the mountains? The trader answers patiently. The rivers, he says, are running higher than usual this season. Nothing alarming, just something to respect. Grass remains good for now. The buffalo have been plentiful. He advises everyone not to hurry unnecessarily. Slow and steady gets more wagons to Oregon than fast and foolish. Several older emigrants nod in agreement. It is advice they have heard before. Still, hearing it from someone who has crossed these lands many times gives the words additional weight. Before leaving, the trader notices a young boy staring curiously at the long rifle slung across his saddle. With a smile, he reaches into one of his saddlebags and produces a small, polished antler. "You keep that." The boy accepts it with wide eyes. It is perhaps the finest treasure he has owned. After exchanging farewells, the rider disappears toward the eastern horizon until both horse and rider become little more than moving specks against the grasslands. For the rest of the morning, conversation centers around the meeting. People repeat the trader's advice. They speculate about the mountains. Children imagine enormous buffalo herds stretching beyond sight. The journey suddenly feels larger than it had yesterday. Lunch is eaten beside a shallow spring, bubbling from beneath a low hillside. The water is remarkably cold. Several emigrants cup their hands beneath the flow, rather than using buckets. Its freshness is unlike the warmer streams crossed earlier in the journey. Nearby, one woman carefully opens a small wooden chest lined with cloth. Inside are several precious possessions that have survived every mile so far. A family Bible, a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a tiny porcelain figurine wrapped inside an old handkerchief. She checks each item before closing the lid once more. Many families carry objects with little practical value, but enormous emotional importance. A wedding ring, a pocket watch inherited from a grandfather, a lock of hair, a child's first pair of shoes. These keepsakes occupy almost no space inside the wagon, yet they carry the weight of entire lifetimes. The afternoon grows warmer. Heat shimmers above the prairie. Grasshoppers leap from nearly every step, vanishing into the tall grass before landing again. Small lizards dart across sunlit rocks. Far overhead, a golden eagle circles with effortless grace. As the company rounds a gentle bend in the trail, the lead wagons begin slowing. Word passes backward. Come look. People shade their eyes against the afternoon sun. There, stretching across the distant landscape, lies something unlike anything they have yet encountered. A broad silver ribbon reflecting the sunlight, so wide that its opposite bank appears softened by distance. The Platte River. For a moment, nearly everyone stops walking. After weeks of following dusty tracks across open prairie, the sight of such an immense river feels almost unbelievable. It winds lazily across the plains, broken into countless shallow channels surrounding sandy islands and gravel bars. Its surface sparkles beneath the afternoon light like polished glass. One child quietly whispers that it looks like the sea. His father smiles. Wait until you see the ocean. The boy nods thoughtfully, trying to imagine something even larger. The wagon train does not reach the river before sunset. Instead, they make camp upon a gentle rise, overlooking its broad valley. From there, they can hear the faint murmur of flowing water, carried upward by the evening breeze. The sound is comforting. Tomorrow they will finally walk beside the famous river, whose name has appeared so often in guidebooks and letters. They do not yet know that its valley will accompany them for hundreds of miles, nor do they realize that the seemingly gentle river has a personality all its own. Many old travelers joke that the Platte is a mile wide and only 6 inches deep. The saying usually earns a laugh. Yet beneath the humor lies an important truth. Crossing it, navigating beside it, and depending upon it will prove far more complicated than first impressions suggest. Morning breaks over the Platte Valley with a softness that surprises everyone. Instead of the rolling prairie stretching endlessly in every direction, the land now opens into a broad corridor shaped by water over countless centuries. The river catches the first light of day, turning bands of shallow water into ribbons of silver and pale gold. Wisps of mist drift above the channels before dissolving beneath the warming sun. From the campsite, the Platte appears calm, almost gentle. It is difficult to imagine that this same river has frustrated thousands of emigrants before you. Breakfast is prepared while everyone admires the view. Children point toward the sandy islands scattered throughout the river, wondering if people live on them. A mother explains that they are too small and too often flooded. Another child asks why the river has so many separate channels instead of one large stream. No one knows the scientific answer. An older trapper traveling with the company simply shrugs. That's just how the Platte likes to run. The explanation satisfies everyone for the moment. After the wagons are loaded, the train gradually descends into the valley. The ground feels different beneath your boots. Instead of firm prairie soil, patches of fine sand now cover the trail. Walking becomes slightly more tiring. Each step sinks just enough to remind you that pulling heavy wagons through this landscape requires even greater effort from the oxen. The animals lower their heads and continue without complaint. Their hooves leave broad prints that the wind will erase before long. Soon the trail settles beside the river itself. The Platte is unlike any body of water most emigrants have ever seen. It is astonishingly wide. In some places, the opposite bank seems almost too distant to distinguish clearly. Yet the water remains surprisingly shallow across much of its breadth. Long sandbars divide the current into dozens of winding channels that twist around one another before joining again farther downstream. The river never seems to decide exactly where it wishes to flow. Its course shifts constantly. One spring flood may carve an entirely new channel. Another may bury an old one beneath layers of fresh sand. This restless nature makes the Platte difficult to cross and impossible to predict with complete confidence. For now, however, the wagon train remains on the southern bank, following the well-established trail westward. The morning passes peacefully. Waterfowl become far more numerous than on the open prairie. Flocks of geese glide low across the river before landing with graceful splashes. White pelicans drift upon quiet pools, occasionally dipping their enormous bills beneath the surface. Herons stand perfectly still along muddy banks, waiting with remarkable patience for small fish. Even people who have spent their lives hunting or farming pause to admire the abundance of wildlife. The river transforms the landscape, Grass grows thicker here. Willow thickets line many of the channels. Tall cottonwoods cast welcome patches of shade across portions of the trail. The emigrants quickly learn to appreciate these trees. Their broad branches offer shelter during the hottest hours of the day. Their fallen limbs provide precious firewood. Their trunks become convenient places to tie livestock while meals are prepared. By late morning, another wagon train appears ahead. This one is considerably larger. Dozens upon dozens of white canvas wagons stretch along the riverbank as far as the eye can comfortably follow. Smoke rises from breakfast fires. Children chase one another between the wagons. Oxen graze peacefully nearby. The two companies gradually draw together until they are traveling within sight of one another. Greetings are exchanged. News travels quickly. One family mentions seeing wolves several nights earlier. Another reports excellent grazing a day's journey ahead. Someone else warns that mosquitoes become especially troublesome near certain stretches of the river after sunset. Such information may seem ordinary, yet these conversations form an informal network through which practical knowledge spreads across the trail. Guidebooks provide general advice. Fellow travelers provide yesterday's news. Around midday, the combined companies stop near a broad stand of cottonwood trees. The shade is almost luxurious after so many lunches eaten beneath open skis. Meals are prepared while children from different wagon trains quickly become friends. Within minutes, they are inventing games together, as though they have known one another for years. They skip stones across shallow channels, build tiny forts from driftwood, search for interesting shells along the sandy banks. Their parents watch with quiet amusement. Children possess an extraordinary ability to treat unfamiliar places as playgrounds. Adults more often see them as obstacles. Several men decide to inspect their wagons thoroughly during the extended break. One crawls beneath his wagon, carrying a small hammer. He taps each iron fitting, listening carefully to the sound. A dull note may suggest a loose bolt. A sharp ring usually indicates everything remains secure. Another man removes a wheel entirely to grease the axle. The thick mixture of animal fat and tar has collected dust over previous days, creating a gritty paste that must be cleaned away before fresh grease is applied. Without regular maintenance, wooden axles quickly overheat from constant friction. Some emigrants describe seeing smoke rise from neglected wagon hubs. Others tell stories of wheels catching fire after long downhill descents. Whether every tale is true hardly matters. Everyone takes axle maintenance seriously. Nearby, several women gather beside the river to wash clothing. The work is demanding. Heavy wet fabric must be scrubbed against washboards before being rinsed in the cold current. Sheets, shirts, and children's trousers are then spread across bushes and low branches to dry in the warm breeze. For a few hours, The riverbank resembles an outdoor laundry stretching beneath the cottonwoods. The afternoon march begins more slowly than usual. The oxen seem content after a longer rest. The people appreciate the opportunity to walk in cooler conditions beneath scattered clouds drifting overhead. Conversation turns toward landmarks. Experienced travelers speak of towering rock formations, still many days away. Places with memorable names passed from wagon train to wagon train. Names like Ash Hollow, Courthouse Rock, Chimney Rock, Scott's Bluff. Each landmark serves as both navigation and encouragement. Reaching one means another section of the journey has been completed. The children eagerly ask when they will see these famous places. The answers vary. A week, perhaps 10 days, depends on the weather. On the Oregon Trail, nearly every estimate includes uncertainty. Late in the afternoon, the wagon captain notices something unusual along the riverbank. Several enormous tracks pressed deeply into the damp sand. The prints are unmistakable. Buffalo, a great many of them. The herd itself is nowhere in sight, but the fresh tracks suggest they passed through during the night. The children excitedly compare the size of the hoofprints with their own boots. One boy places his foot inside a print and discovers there is room to spare. The adults inspect the surrounding area with interest. Fresh buffalo signs often mean fresh meat may soon be available if the opportunity arises. They also remind everyone that these plains belong first to the wildlife that has roamed them for thousands of years. The emigrants are merely passing through. As evening approaches, the wagons climb onto a low terrace overlooking the river. The campsite offers a magnificent view. Below, countless channels of the Platte reflect the orange glow of the setting sun. Sandbars shine almost white against the darkening water. Geese fly overhead in graceful V-shaped formations, calling softly to one another as they search for places to spend the night. Dinner is unusually cheerful. The cooler weather, abundant water, and pleasant scenery have lifted spirits throughout the company. Someone jokes that the Platte is wide enough to water every cow in America. Another replies that finding the deepest part of it may take longer than crossing it. Laughter spreads around the fire. Even the oldest travelers smile. After supper, people remain awake longer than usual. The evening is simply too beautiful to hurry into sleep. A father sits beside his teenage son, teaching him how to identify the North Star. An elderly woman quietly writes a few lines in her diary by firelight, carefully describing the broad river and the endless flights of birds. Another traveler sketches the distant valley in a small notebook. Hopping the drawing will remind him years later of this peaceful evening. Eventually, the fires burn low. Conversations fade into quiet murmurs. The Platte continues flowing through the darkness, its many channels producing a constant whisper that blends with the rustling cottonwood leaves. Tomorrow the river will still be there, winding patiently beside the trail. So will the miles. Yet before many more sunsets have passed, the emigrants will begin seeing something they have only imagined until now, far beyond the western horizon, rising faintly from the earth itself. The first outlines of immense stone landmarks will appear. For many travelers, that first distant glimpse will feel like meeting old friends whose names they have known long before ever seeing their faces. The morning begins with the gentle sound of moving water rather than the whisper of prairie grass. During the night, the breeze shifted, carrying the murmur of the Platte River directly through the camp. It is a comforting sound, steady and unhurried, like someone turning the pages of a book very slowly. A light mist rests over the valley. The cottonwood trees nearest the river appear only as pale silhouettes against the brightening sky, their branches fatting into the fog. Tiny droplets cling to every blade of grass, soaking boots almost immediately as people begin their morning chores. Several of the oxen are already awake, calmly chewing their cud before another day of pulling heavy wagons. They seem almost impossible to hurry. One animal blinks lazily while its owner fastens the wooden yoke across its shoulders, entirely unconcerned with the long miles that lie ahead. There is something reassuring about their steady nature. People become anxious. Children become impatient. Weather changes without warning. The oxen simply continue. Breakfast is slightly more enjoyable than usual. The river has provided something that has been absent from many meals. Fresh fish. Late the previous afternoon, 2 young men had cast simple lines into one of the quieter channels, while others prepared camp. Their patience was rewarded with several modest-sized fish, enough that a handful of families can each enjoy a few bites alongside their usual cornmeal and bacon. It is not a feast. Still, the fresh flavor is warmly welcomed after weeks of preserved food. One elderly woman smiles after her first bite and quietly remarks that it tastes like spring. Nobody disagrees. Once breakfast has been cleared away, the wagons resume their slow westward journey. The trail follows the southern edge of the Platte, rarely straying far from the water. From time to time, the river disappears behind groves of cottonwoods or low sandy ridges, only to reveal itself again a short distance later, glittering beneath the growing sun. The valley feels alive. Dragonflies skim above quiet pools. Muskrats leave tiny ripples near the reeds. Occasionally, a beaver slips silently into deeper water with little more than a gentle splash. These animals have been shaping the river long before the first emigrant wagon arrived. Their dams alter small streams. Their lodges rise from quiet backwaters. Many travelers stop briefly to admire the engineering of creatures that have never read a single book on construction. By mid-morning, the company passes the remains of an abandoned campsite used by another wagon train only a few days earlier. The signs are unmistakable. Black circles of cold ashes mark where campfires once burned. A broken wagon tongue rests beneath a tree. Several empty wooden barrels, too damaged to repair, lie on their sides with their iron hoops beginning to rust. Nearby, flattened grass shows where livestock had grazed. The place is strangely quiet. Only a week ago, it would have been full of voices, children laughing, kettles boiling, and wagons creaking. Now nature has already begun reclaiming it. Birds hop confidently through the ashes searching for seeds. The wind carries loose blades of grass across the abandoned camp. Within another season, little evidence may remain that anyone ever stopped there at all. The Oregon Trail is constantly moving. No campsite remains busy for long. Thousands of people pass through. Very few stay. The children notice something else. Scattered across the ground are dozens of tiny white feathers. A family traveling ahead must have butchered chickens before continuing west. Nothing edible would have been wasted. Only the feathers remain, drifting lightly whenever the breeze stirs. Late in the morning, the wagon captain slows the company beside a shallow rise. He points toward the western horizon. Look carefully. At first, nothing seems unusual. The horizon shimmers beneath the warmth of the day. Then, gradually, several people begin seeing it. A faint shape, so distant that it almost blends with the sky itself. One child mistakes it for a cloud. Another insists it is a mountain. Neither is entirely wrong. It is the first distant glimpse of higher ground far to the west, not the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Not yet. These are the earliest hints that the endless plains will not continue forever. The sight creates quiet excitement throughout the company. For weeks, the landscape has seemed almost unchanged. Now the horizon offers proof that something different lies ahead. People continue glancing west throughout the morning, wondering whether the distant shape has grown any closer. It never seems to. The trail has a peculiar way of making landmarks appear frozen in place until, suddenly, one day they stand directly before you. Around noon, the wagons stop beside a broad sandy beach where one channel of the Platte flows gently around a gravel bar. The children are allowed a little more freedom than usual. Several spend nearly an hour collecting unusual stones, polished smooth by the current. Others search for shells left behind when the water changes course. One boy proudly discovers what he believes is a dinosaur bone. His father examines it carefully before smiling. It belonged to a buffalo. The boy seems only slightly disappointed. Meanwhile, several women spread blankets across the warm sand to air them out beneath the sunshine. Moisture has a habit of finding its way into bedding, even during pleasant weather. Dry blankets tonight mean warmer sleep. Nearby, two blacksmiths traveling with different wagon companies compare tools while repairing a damaged wagon wheel. Although neither man has a proper forge out here, both possess remarkable practical skill. Using little more than hammers, spare iron fittings, and considerable patience, they manage to strengthen a cracked section of the wheel well enough for it to continue. The repair may not last forever. It only needs to last until the next settlement. That is often enough. The afternoon grows warmer, but the river breeze prevents the heat from becoming overwhelming. Walking beside the wagons, you begin noticing how everyone has unconsciously settled into familiar places within the train. Certain families always travel near the front. Others prefer the middle. A few consistently remain near the rear. Children know exactly which wagons belong to their closest friends. Older men naturally gather together whenever the company pauses. The trail has become a traveling neighborhood. People who were complete strangers only weeks ago now borrow tools from one another without hesitation. They share recipes for making hard bread last longer, exchange sewing needles, offer advice on treating sore feet or calming frightened oxen. Friendships formed under difficult circumstances often develop quickly. Everyone understands the challenges because everyone is living them together. Late in the afternoon, dark birds begin circling high above one section of the valley. Several experienced hunters glance in that direction. The birds are not random. They are gathering for a reason. As the wagons draw closer, the explanation becomes clear. A buffalo lies beside the riverbank. The great animal is already dead. No one knows exactly how. Perhaps old age, perhaps injury, perhaps wolves during the night. The carcass has attracted scavengers from miles around. Ravens perch nearby. A pair of coyotes slip quietly into the grass as the wagons approach. Far overhead, several vultures continue circling patiently. Nature wastes nothing. Life on the plains depends upon constant renewal. The emigrants pause only briefly before continuing. There is no practical use in stopping. The meat has already spoiled beneath the warm sun. Still, the sight reminds everyone how closely life and death exist beside one another on the frontier. One creature's end becomes another's survival. As evening approaches, the valley begins filling with long golden shadows. The light softens until every cottonwood tree appears outlined in bronze. The river reflects the colors of the sunset so perfectly that sky and water almost seem to merge. Camp is made on a gently sloping meadow, overlooking one of the widest channels. After supper, several children skip stones across the calm water until the fading light makes it impossible to see where they land. Nearby, an elderly grandfather carves a small whistle from a piece of willow, while his grandchildren watch every careful movement of his knife. When he finally hands it to the youngest child, the little instrument produces a cheerful note that echoes across the quiet river. The sound brings smiles to faces throughout the camp. It is a tiny reminder that joy does not require comfort or luxury. Sometimes it can be carved from a single branch beside a river. Night settles slowly across the Platte Valley. The stars emerge one after another above the dark silhouettes of the cottonwoods. The river continues its endless journey eastward, while the wagon train dreams of the west. And somewhere beyond the next several days of steady travel, rising from the plains with astonishing suddenness, stands a towering pillar of stone that generations of emigrants have described with wonder in their diaries. Many believed that once they saw it with their own eyes, the journey truly felt real. The first rays of sunlight spread gently across the Platte Valley, touching the tops of the cottonwood trees before reaching the wagons below. The river is almost perfectly still this morning. Only the occasional jump of a fish disturbs its glassy surface, sending circles of ripples drifting outward until they disappear among the reeds. For a few quiet moments, the entire camp seems reluctant to wake. The previous day's walk had been longer than usual, and every traveler feels it. Boots are pulled on more slowly. Blankets are folded with tired hands. Even the children, who normally spring from their beds with surprising energy, yawn as they help gather cooking pots and refill water buckets. The smell of breakfast soon spreads through the cool air. Cornmeal porridge, salt pork, fresh coffee for those who still have enough beans remaining. A few families have already begun replacing coffee with roasted chicory or other substitutes. The flavor is not quite the same, but it stretches precious supplies a little farther. One father jokingly claims that by the time they reach Oregon, they will have forgotten what real coffee tastes like. His wife smiles. "You'll remember the first cup." Several nearby travelers quietly agree. Simple comforts become larger in memory the longer they are absent. Before the wagons begin moving, the captain gathers everyone for a short announcement. The trail ahead, he explains, follows the river much as before, but they should expect increasing traffic over the coming days. More wagon companies, more livestock, more travelers heading both west and east. The Platte Valley serves as one of the great highways of the American frontier. Everyone shares it. By mid-morning, his prediction proves correct. The company overtakes a smaller wagon train, moving at a slower pace. Its wagons appear older. Several canvas covers have been patched so many times that they resemble quilts stitched from different shades of cloth. The people wave warmly as the larger company passes. One elderly man raises his hat with a smile. Another family offers friendly greetings, while their children excitedly watch the longer procession move by. There is no competition between them. Everyone understands that each wagon, regardless of its condition, carries hopes just as important as their own. A short while later, another sight captures everyone's attention. Dust far ahead, not the broad cloud created by one wagon train. Several separate columns, rising into the bright blue sky. As the distance closes, the reason becomes clear. Hundreds of cattle, their lowing carries across the valley long before the animals themselves are fully visible. The herd stretches across the grassland in an almost endless line, accompanied by mounted drovers who guide them with remarkable calm. Unlike the emigrants, these men are not traveling toward Oregon. They are moving livestock between trading posts and settlements, following routes that often intersect with the Great Emigrant Trail. The wagon train pulls slightly aside to allow the cattle to pass more comfortably. For nearly half an hour, the procession continues. Cows, calves, oxen, dust rising around thousands of hooves. The air fills with the earthy smell of livestock. Children count the animals until they lose track somewhere beyond 100. One little girl decides there must be at least 1,000,000. No one argues. By the time the last of the herd disappears into the distance, the grass beside the trail has been thoroughly trampled. The emigrants resume their steady pace. The encounter serves as another reminder that the frontier is far busier than many people back east imagine. The trail is not an empty wilderness. It is a moving world. Hunters, missionaries, soldiers, merchants, native communities, trappers, explorers, families seeking new homes, all cross these vast plains for different reasons. As the sun climbs higher, the valley begins revealing more signs of those who came before. Deep wagon ruts run alongside the current trail. Some are so old that grass has begun growing inside them. Others remain sharply defined despite years of use. In certain places, several parallel trails spread across the landscape where earlier travelers chose different routes around muddy ground or steep hills. Standing above them on a low ridge, the patterns resemble giant ribbons woven across the earth. Every rut represents countless wagon wheels, countless footsteps, countless decisions made by people who could not know what waited beyond the next horizon. Around noon, the company pauses beneath one of the largest groves of cottonwoods they have yet encountered. The shade is wonderfully cool. Birdsong echoes through the branches overhead. For the first time in several days, people linger after finishing lunch. There is no immediate rush to continue. The oxen seem grateful for the longer rest. Many simply lie down in the grass, chewing contentedly while swishing their tails against persistent flies. Nearby, several children discover a fallen cottonwood branch that has been hollowed by insects. Holding it to one ear, they insist they can hear the river singing inside. An elderly grandmother laughs softly. "When you're my age," she tells them, "you'll hear rivers in places you never expected." Whether she means the branch or memory itself is difficult to tell. The afternoon passes beneath scattered clouds, drifting lazily across the sky. The light changes constantly. One moment, the valley glows brilliant green, The next, passing clouds soften every color into muted shades of gray and silver. Walking beneath these changing skies, many travelers find themselves thinking less about the destination and more about the journey itself. The days have begun blending together. The same boots, the same wagons, the same companions. At first glance, every day seems nearly identical. Yet if someone were to compare them carefully, no two are truly alike. Each sunrise reveals different clouds, different birds, different conversations around the campfire, different small victories. One afternoon brings fresh fish, another a stubborn ox, another an unexpected meeting with strangers. The Oregon Trail teaches people to notice these quiet differences. Life becomes richer when measured by moments rather than milestones. Late in the afternoon, one of the younger boys suddenly points toward the western horizon. I can see it again. Everyone knows immediately what he means. The faint shape, first noticed yesterday, has grown clearer. It no longer resembles an ordinary cloud. Instead, it rises distinctly above the plains, pale against the blue sky. Someone suggests it might be the beginning of the famous landmarks described in nearly every emigrant guidebook. Others are less certain. Distance across the plains is famously deceptive. A landmark that appears only a day's walk away may require 3 or 4 days to reach. Still, excitement quietly spreads through the company. People find themselves glancing west more frequently than before. Each hour seems to reveal the distant shape with slightly greater clarity. As evening approaches, the wagons stop near a gently flowing side channel of the Platte. The water is shallow enough for children to remove their boots and cool tired feet after another long march. Adults do the same, though with considerably less enthusiasm and much more careful attention to sore muscles and tender blisters. One father sits on the bank, while his young daughter slowly pours cool water over his feet from a tin cup. Neither says very much. They simply watch the current carry tiny leaves downstream. It is an ordinary family moment. Quiet, gentle, unremarkable. Years later, it will probably become one of the memories he treasures most. After supper, several families gather around a single campfire rather than sitting separately. Someone produces a small notebook filled with favorite poems, copied carefully before leaving home. By the flickering firelight, different people take turns reading aloud. Some verses speak of home, others describe rivers, forests, and distant places. The words drift into the cool evening air, carried away by the same breeze that rustles the cottonwood leaves overhead. When the reading ends, nobody applauds. Instead, there is a comfortable silence, the kind shared only by people who have traveled together long enough to understand that conversation is not always necessary. One by one, families return to their wagons. The fires burn lower. The stars brighten above the valley. Far to the west, the mysterious shape remains visible even beneath the fading light, standing patiently on the horizon. With every mile, it grows a little larger. With every sunrise, the plains reveal a little more of its true form. Before long, these emigrants will stand close enough to appreciate why generations of travelers considered it more than simply a landmark. To weary families who had walked for weeks across seemingly endless grasslands, it often felt like a silent promise that the trail was unfolding exactly as it should. The night passes peacefully beneath a sky crowded with stars. A gentle breeze moves through the cottonwood branches, causing their leaves to shimmer with a soft, whispering sound that blends almost perfectly with the distant murmur of the Platte River. Somewhere beyond the edge of camp, a lone coyote calls into the darkness, its voice carrying for miles across the open valley before fading into silence. No one seems alarmed. By now, the emigrants have grown accustomed to the sounds of the prairie. The unfamiliar has gradually become familiar. The strange has slowly become ordinary. When dawn finally arrives, it brings another clear day, the kind travelers always hope for. There is no threatening wall of storm clouds gathering on the horizon, no heavy rain soaking blankets, no biting wind pushing against the wagons. Instead, warm sunlight spreads across the valley, illuminating the countless channels of the Platte until they sparkle like scattered pieces of polished glass. Breakfast disappears quickly. The company is eager to continue. There is a quiet excitement that has not been present for several days. Everyone has noticed the distant shape on the western horizon, growing a little larger with each passing mile. Nobody says much about it. They simply keep looking. The wagons begin rolling shortly after sunrise. As the hours pass, the air grows warmer, though a steady breeze from the river keeps the worst of the heat away. The oxen settle into their dependable pace, their broad shoulders rising and falling with every step. The familiar rhythm returns once more. Wood creaks, leather stretches, iron rims roll steadily over packed earth. Boots press fresh footprints into the dusty trail. Children search the grass for unusual flowers. Parents quietly calculate how much flour remains. Someone begins softly humming a hymn. Another traveler whistles an old tune learned decades earlier. Life continues much as it has every day since leaving Missouri. Yet the landscape ahead is changing. By late morning, the distant shape no longer resembles a cloud at all. It stands alone, tall, pale, unmistakably made of stone. A murmur spreads naturally through the wagon train. There it is. People stop walking for just a moment, shielding their eyes against the bright sunlight. Even from many miles away, the great rock rises dramatically above the surrounding plains, standing where almost nothing else breaks the horizon. Children stare in amazement. Several adults smile without realizing they are doing so. For weeks, they have relied upon rivers, the sun and guidebooks to judge their progress. Now they can finally see one of the famous landmarks described by countless travelers who came before them. It feels strangely reassuring. The trail ahead is no longer just words printed on a page. It has become real. The wagons continue forward throughout the afternoon. Slowly, patiently, no one expects to reach the great landmark today. Distance on the plains has fooled too many travelers for that. What appears close often requires another full day of walking, sometimes more. Still, every mile now seems to carry renewed purpose. The children invent stories about the towering rock. One believes a giant built it. Another insists it must have been standing there since the beginning of the world. The adults smile at the imaginative explanations. The true story, shaped over millions of years by ancient rivers, wind, and time itself, is remarkable enough without embellishment. During the midday stop, several emigrants climb a small rise overlooking the valley. From there, they can see the Platte winding lazily across the plains, while the distant stone landmark watches over everything in quiet silence. One woman opens her diary and carefully writes a few lines. She describes the river, the endless grass, the great rock waiting on the horizon. Perhaps she cannot know it now, but many of those simple diary entries will one day become some of the most valuable first-hand records historians possess about life on the Oregon Trail. Nearby, her youngest son carefully presses a prairie flower between the pages of an old book. He hopes to carry it all the way to Oregon. Whether the delicate petals survive the journey remains uncertain. The gesture itself somehow feels important. Throughout the afternoon, more travelers from other wagon companies appear on the trail. Some are days ahead. Others are just beginning to catch up. Everyone seems to share the same quiet excitement. People point toward the landmark. Conversations begin with practical questions about water and grazing before inevitably turning toward the towering stone visible in the distance. It is remarkable how a single feature of the landscape can lift the spirits of so many weary travelers. The prairie, magnificent though it is, often feels endless. A landmark offers reassurance. It tells people they are moving forward, that every aching step truly counts. As the sun begins sinking toward the western horizon, the wagon captain chooses another pleasant campsite overlooking the broad valley. The evening light transforms everything. The Platte glows with ribbons of orange and crimson. The cottonwood leaves shimmer like tiny coins in the fatting sunlight. Far away, the great rock catches the final rays of day, standing bright against a sky slowly turning shades of lavender and deep blue. After supper, the camp grows unusually quiet. There is no fiddle tonight, no stories told loudly around the fire. Instead, people simply watch the sunset. Some mend clothing, others write letters they hope to mail once they reach the next settlement. children grow sleepy while leaning against their parents. The long days of walking are beginning to show. As darkness settles across the valley, the landmark finally disappears into the night. Tomorrow, it will rise again with the morning sun, closer, larger, more impressive than ever before. For generations of emigrants, seeing it emerge from the prairie was one of the unforgettable moments of the journey west. It marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The broad grasslands were gradually giving way to a landscape of towering bluffs, strange rock formations, and eventually the distant mountains that still waited beyond the horizon. But those adventures belong to another evening's story. Tonight, the campfires slowly fade into glowing embers. The oxen settle quietly into the grass. The Platte continues its endless journey through the darkness, whispering softly beside the trail that so many hopeful families have followed. And somewhere beyond the sleeping prairie, the silent stone sentinel waits patiently for another sunrise, ready to welcome yet another line of covered wagons into the ever-changing story of the American West. Sleep well, and when you're ready, we'll continue the journey farther along the Oregon Trail, where the famous landmarks of the Platte Valley rise from the plains one by one, guiding weary travelers toward the distant Rocky Mountains.